it's lower. I guess it really depends on the demographic that you're polling as well. You know, if we ask the same question of a bunch of lower income families who'd lost their jobs, they've been furloughed or made redundant, then the chances are that there'll be a lot more pressure and stress, and therefore one would expect the numbers to be higher. So I think we have to certainly be cognizant of who we're asking and this and what sort of status or conditions they've been living in the last 12 months.
Thanks. And Jeff, obviously, you're a buyer of legal services, spend a lot of time with lawyers. Were you surprised with that result, or is that what you expected?
That is kind of what I expected. I agree with Ash that you might think it'd be a bit higher, but I read an article recently from Harvard Business Review that specifically said when you ask this question and the first go, about 19% will answer it honestly. So you obviously have a lot more people answering it honestly, because it's a hard thing to acknowledge. Like, it's to say that my mental health is deteriorated. It's a challenging thing to even kind of accept in oneself. So I think it's pretty powerful that the number is 2/3 of the number of people out there are saying that, because I think that probably 100% of the people out there don't want that answer to be the case.
Yeah, yeah. And Anna, how do you find that within the legal sector? From
I am surprised. I am surprised, contrary to the guys. I think that if you were to conduct this survey among Polish lawyers, especially M&A lawyers, probably most of them would say that no, but that's because they would associate the last 12 months with the pandemic. And I think that M&A market being extremely hot in Poland, basically in Europe right now, whether it's been the pandemic or not hasn't really had much impact. Also, depending on the country you're from, as I told you before, I'm actually at the office, so I'm not really limited to working from home. So I think that my everyday life is more or less the same. It's just the intensity of it that's been extremely huge for the past 12 months. So I think that my colleagues in Poland would have probably said that it's basically been the same as before that.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I take the point as well that we've got a small sample here today, but you know, if that sample reflective of particularly of the legal sector, then you know, people have been under pressure in the last 12 months. So what was the answer? Resilience. And this webinar today is around resilience, and it's how do we improve resilience. And of course, you know, the sector that we primarily work in is within the legal sector, but this is for resilience is within any business, and with any sector. So what do we mean by resilience? So resilience might mean to you something completely different to what it means to me. So perhaps Anna, can I ask you what you think resilience means in the legal sector?
Oh. Well, what does it mean actually, and what would somebody tell you that it means? You know what? I think it's the ability to sort of go on regardless of how tough things are around you. I was, you know, when we were talking last week, I was in a completely different state of mind than I'm today. I have to be honest. You know, some of the things that we discussed that we would be talking about, I guess I was much more optimistic about last week than I am today. You know, mental well-being, taking the time to sort of, you know, become aware, you know, become a little bit more in touch with yourself. Today, after, you know, 10 days of late nights and a full weekend at the office, you know, I have to say that, you know, it's very difficult for me to talk about the positive discussion about mental well-being. So I guess resilience for me is being able to be here and and to sort of, you know, have a bit of a distance to myself and towards the whole thing that's surrounding me. So sort of push through, go ahead and still enjoy what I'm doing.
Yeah, and that's, you know, I do hope self-care that you know, you are able to look after yourself in these times well. And you know, we do part of the webinar today, we are going to be talking about leaders and actually how we can look after the leaders, because if we're not looking after the leaders, then how can the leaders look after everybody
exactly
else? So,
yeah,
I think it's really important that we cover that. And Ash, obviously, you know, you travel the world talking about resilience, talking about your own experiences. So what does resilience mean? What does it look like? Is it the ability to adapt and learn in the face of adversity? Is it something different?
No, that's exactly what it means to me. I mean, I'm sure there are other definitions out there, but I personally believe very much that it's about adaptation and learning. And how many businesses or teams or organizations have we been part of who claim to be a learning organization firstly, or we're agile or we're adaptable? You know, what do these things actually mean? And I think when I unpick the sort of the equation of resilience equals adapting and learning in the face of adversity, it's about muscle memory, you know, banking the things that we do get through. You know, I've spoken to so many companies and sort of who've said that they've had a tough time getting through the last year with COVID. And when I sort of propose or suggest that if I'd gone into their business a year ago and said, right, from tomorrow, you're going to have to homeschool your kids, you can't come into the office for 12 months, and you've got to grow the business and win business and all those things, you'd have all turned around and said, it's impossible. Yet you're all still here, and some of you are even still smiling. So, you know, the lesson from that is that we are more resilient than we think. We're far more resilient than we think. And we've got to take every one of those sort of experiences that we come through. And that's not to say that it hasn't been extremely challenging or is still very challenging for all of these people, but take everything that you've come through and bank that feeling, knowing that it's unlikely that the same thing is going to happen again, but you can use that experience to be able to be more resilient and more adaptable to the next thing that comes. It helps when you can think about resilience linked to hope. You know, hope being the belief that something's going to get better. Clearly, right now in the COVID scenario, we've got vaccines being rolled out globally, so there is hope that life will go back to a new normal. I think most of us are probably hoping it doesn't go back completely to the old normal, because if we've learned anything from COVID, it's that we can do things differently, and we can think differently and behave differently, particularly as leaders, to still do great things. And it all, again, you know, that sort of adaptability piece links to the conversation or the issue about complex things and complex environments. You know, the world used to be complicated, but I think it's now, you know, most of us at least accept that it's complex. And the key thing about complexity is that it's unpredictable, right? So we can't know everything in advance. We can't predict what's going to happen in advance. So how do you succeed as an individual or as a business where you cannot predict everything or know all the answers in advance? You have to have an adaptable mindset. And therefore, thinking about what it means to be adaptable, I think, is equally important when we talk about what resilience is all about. And if I may, if you indulge me for a second, you know, adaptability is about, I think, the intersection or the interplay between agility and innovation. If you think about complex things or problems that we have to solve, if we are agile, or we apply agile thinking, you know, and let's say that's, you know, a fast response to change, but we use old solutions, then we're going to probably fail. If we're innovative, i.e. we are coming up with novel solutions or a novel response to change, but we're doing it too slowly, we will also potentially equally fail. So it's having that combination of agility and innovation that allows us to be free enough to be genuinely adaptable. And that comes down to, you know, sort of mindset and behaviors. And Jeff sort of alluded to this earlier about, you know, the importance of behavior. And in complexity, accepting or getting our heads around the idea that we can't know everything and getting comfortable with the sort of discomfort of not knowing everything is the first step, really. But then if you're a leader in a team and thinking about how to build resilience, it's identifying, you know, are you relying currently on individuals who are resilient, your super resilient people who are, you know, sort of taking on their lion's share of the burden? Or have you got a resilient team? And how to think, and we can obviously explore this throughout the call or the webinar, but thinking about how to build those interconnections and the network and the trust and all those things that are required to create a resilient team rather than just individuals who might be resilient in a group.
Yeah, thank you. And Jeff, you know, we've talked about this already, but you know, you as a buyer of legal services, you've often told me that, you know, you're looking for resilient teams. You want teams that are going to become part of your teams. You want to know if they're resilient. You probe questions around this, and you know, vulnerability is again that word that comes up, and
Sure.
it's so how do you, as a buyer of legal services, how do you do that? How do you ensure that the teams that you're outsourcing, bringing in, that they are resilient, or you know that they're being looked after to enable them to be resilient?
So, you know, first I'd say, like, why do I even look at that in the first place? Why do I care about that? And how do you do it? I think we all, buyers of legal services, when you're hiring someone externally, you need their help, right? You actually, it's kind of a vulnerable act. It's like, I can't do this. I need your help. I can't do this stuff on my own. And so you're putting something that you care about into the hands of another, whether it's a file, a transaction. And we all want to work with people that are innovative, agile, Ash said a number of these words, creative. We want trust with those relationships. But the key to having all of that stuff is actually having a capacity to embrace discomfort. You can't have innovation without failure. You can't have trust without actually being real and honest and open with other people. Otherwise, you're just going to feel a sense of disconnection, and you're never going to get that trust. My experience is that, you know, I've hired firms, probably 100 firms from over 30 countries in the past 15 years, and wonderful places. But often you run into firms that they're always trying to sell you the same kind of thing. It's not differentiated at all. We're the best, we're the smartest, we're super agile, we've got a great culture, we got all this stuff. And it's all about, we got everything, and we're the best out there. And you kind of know, like, I was in a law firm too, right? You kind of know no one can be perfect. No one can be all things to everyone. So it's hard to kind of hear that and go, oh, well, great, I'm going to buy that thing because it's the perfect answer and it's going to solve all my problems. It's kind of, it's not real. So I find that when you ask questions of people and trying to penetrate their kind of the personality of the individual, and ask them questions about, you know, tell me about the failures that they've had and what they've learned from it. Tell them, you know, personal challenges they've had, whatever, things like that, probing questions that give opportunity for that person to be vulnerable. I think that's what I'm looking for. And it doesn't mean, say, immediately, I'm going to tell you all about my personal feelings, my deep dark secrets. But if they're willing to take that courageous step of saying, well, you know, there's this one file that really didn't work well, and this is how we contributed to the failure, and this is how we changed and adjusted as a result of it. I'm like, that person is being honest and direct. That person is someone who I actually probably can trust. And so that's how I go about it.
Yeah. And the word vulnerability, it's, and I think even 12 months ago, the word vulnerability, if as a consultancy, we thought about doing a white paper around vulnerability about 14 months ago, because vulnerability was such this word that nobody really talked about. And it was kind of, you know, should we talk about it more? Whereas in the last 12 months, what's really good is that people are being more vulnerable, but they're also talking about vulnerability and vulnerability as a positive. So in that sense of building resilient teams, is it about creating connections and sharing vulnerabilities? Is that the main thing? And Anna, I know that, you know, when we've been talking, and as part of our group, you've often talked about peer support. What do you mean by that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am absolutely convinced that if you don't have support among your peers, I mean, you just cannot do a good job. You know, you are nothing without your team. And as I mentioned before, our immediate M&A team within the firm is about 40 people. I'm very fortunate to have one of the best teams, I think, possible. But even though I think we are, my partners and I, we try to be very aware of the fact that these are individuals, who have needs. We have, regular meetings of the team. We talk with these people. We are always surprised that there is a need for more. You know, when we are having our annual assessments now, and we get to meet these people one-on-one Zoom meetings, there's something always comes up. You know, you always, it turns out that regardless of how you know, how compassionate and how aware you think you are, you really do need to stop and think every once and again, you know, about a specific person. You know, reach out, ask them, because there's always something that will come up. You know, there was an IBA survey done within one of the several initiatives that have sprung up since last year in the IBA that are dealing with mental well-being. And this was a global survey that one of the questions was the employers, so partners in law firms as well, were asked, how do you think that you are addressing the issue of mental well-being? How aware of mental well-being are you? And the numbers were extremely high among the employers. So that was, I think it was 72% in globally, 84% in Europe. And the number of responses on the associate side was absolutely opposite. So, you know, this sort of shows you that, you know, don't take it for granted that you are aware of what the people around you are going through or thinking. I mean, you do need to keep that communication going at all times, which of course is extremely difficult when you are, you know, taking care of clients, taking care of administrative issues, but you always need to concentrate on the person.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think it's that what everybody's, I guess, felt that's been missing in the last 12 months is that sort of responsibility. Who's looking after me? And if I'm looking after everybody else, who's doing that? And homeschooling and everything else, everyone's had all these different pressures. So I think certainly having a feeling that somebody's looking out for you is hugely important. And Ash, if I can come to you and look outside of the legal sector, and obviously your life, which has been very, very different to ours, you know, do you have any tips on how you've built resilient teams? You've had to go into combat situations with a team. You've already talked about the fact that, you know, you've been shot, you were blown up. How do you create resilience within teams like that, where the level of stress is so constantly high all the time?
Well, first thing I'd say is actually there's actually very little difference between the battlefield and business in terms of the challenges of building the teams with the right culture. Is it transcends the environment in which you are leading or operating. Yes, there is obviously a certain amount of stress that goes with the risk of, you know, being killed or wounded when you go to work. But in terms of how you build resilience, it's the fundamental principles of building trust, having a really clear common purpose so that everybody knows exactly what it is you are trying to achieve as a collective. And then communicating, connecting and sharing in a way, we refer to it as shared consciousness, of giving everybody the situational context from strategic to tactical to know how they fit into the bigger picture. Once you've got those three things of trust, common purpose and sort of shared consciousness cooking on gas, then you can really start to empower people. And that's when people start to learn and really show initiative and build their own, you know, experience and resilience for themselves. And it really comes down, I think, to modeling behavior as the leader. So there's a good question in the Q&A there about, you know, vulnerability, and is it different or is it perceived differently between men and women? And I think, you know, that has absolutely been an issue in the past. And it's incumbent therefore on every leader to, you know, model the behavior that they want their organization to live and breathe. And if they don't, then they can't expect others to show vulnerability if they don't. And I'm a big fan of, you know, strength in vulnerability. I find it quite easy because I very often don't know the answer. So when I say I don't know, it's not that I'm playing, it's because I really don't know. And that's why you hire brilliant people, right? If you hire brilliant people, they're the ones who have the ideas and they help inform you. Just because you are in a leadership position, it doesn't mean you are the technical expert or the functionally most competent person in the team, because, you know, you may have not practiced that particular skill for many, many years. But it's being able to harness the collective skills of those people and If you don't know, make it really clear and ask your people and your teams what they think. There's so much, the most impressive leaders and most inspirational leaders I've ever worked for are those that know when to ask those, across the or really deep down in the organization what they think, and genuinely listen to the answer. And then you start to create that feeling of value and influence that is so important for people being connected to their job. And I think it's even more important in today's dispersed, disaggregated digital world, the importance of connecting and finding ways to connect with everybody within your team, to make them feel part of something special, achieving great things, is going to only get more important, particularly if we don't go back to a everybody in the office kind of model, which I really hope we don't. So finding ways to maintain that connectivity in the network and build the trust and those connective tissue pieces between individuals, to Anna's point, peer support is critical. When I do mentoring and coaching for different organizations, I very deliberately try not to do one-on-one coaching unless people really want it. The value I see is getting groups of 2 or 3 or 4 together and deliberately putting them in teams that wouldn't normally see them work together day to day. Having an operations person partnered with an HR person, partnered with a legal person in an organization that normally would work in their own lanes. And actually, when they say I'm struggling to delegate or find ways to give things for my teams to do or whatever, rather than me necessarily jumping straight in to say how I would do it, you then ask the others how they've achieved or not doing the same thing, and you find very quickly this network starts to build of trust and cross pillar support, which is really, really powerful.
Yeah, thank you. And I think something interesting that you said there was the word purpose. And again, vulnerability, purpose is another word that we've heard so much in the last 12 months. We work with so many law firms who actually want us to help discover what their purpose is, but more than that, how actually to communicate that purpose internally and externally. That whole, why do you get up for work, and why would I volunteer to work for you, this firm, or why would I not just go down the road? Because actually that's what people are doing. They're volunteering. So actually, if they're not looked after, if their mental well-being isn't looked after, perhaps they don't have vulnerable leaders, then actually none of that matters, and you may as well leave and go elsewhere. So I think that's a really important point. And as well, covering the question that's come up in the Q&A that had been asked around the difference between men and women. I think personally in the last 12 months, I've probably had more conversations about resilience and mental health with men than I ever have done before. So I don't know whether that's because of the pandemic and in the last 12 months and the whole working from home, as all having conversations with each other in this way, as opposed to sat in an office. Would we be able to have those conversations if we're sat across a board table from each other? Does it make it easier? So actually, has the way in which the world has turned facilitated that?
This is I have a theory on this, and I agree with you, Melissa. This has really changed in the last year, and I just, the thing that what I think has happened is that we're all wired to try to seek connection, right? That's how human beings work. We want to be connected with another person. We want to be connected with others, because otherwise, neurobiologically, we're alone and then we die. So we survive as a community. And I think that we figured out that the price of connection in this environment is showing a little more intimacy, being a little more vulnerable. You see the backgrounds. We can see Ash's daughter and the kids in the background there. And that piece will allow you to kind of get a little bit closer. That's that kind of vulnerability and how that works and relates to connection. And we have such a deeper understanding of ideas of what connection is, what trust is. And the thing that I found so mind-blowing about, trust is they dissected it into this thing called like a vulnerability loop, where I say to you, I signal to you, you say, hey, how's your day going, Jeff? How are you feeling? And I'm going, or I could go like, oh, pretty good. Or if I say, actually, I'm having a really hard time. So I signal vulnerability to you. And then what really matters is how you respond to that. If you kind of close out and go like, oh, okay, well, nice talking to you, that's probably going to really be trust diminishing. But if you say, I want to know more about that, or actually, I'm feeling the same way, or last week I was totally burnt out and I'm having a horrible time. That reaction from you signaling your vulnerability, that is kind of creating the trust bond. And that's not me talking about like what I want the world to be. That is science. That's behavioral economics and psychology, like at its core, how vulnerability kind of creates connection and creates trust. And I think that we've been craving connection in the past year. And so we're willing to be more vulnerable as men about some of the stuff that we used to honestly just equate with weakness and we're afraid to talk about.
Yeah, I'll jump, if I may just jump on that. I mean, that's one of the really positive things about COVID, that I've loved meeting new people, you know, trying to win business and meeting people in their homes over Zoom or whatever, where you would normally never get to know them as sort of humans or parents or husbands or wives. And, you know, you could tell people who hadn't done a lot of video conferencing before. I mean, in the military, we'd done this for decades. Because, you know, we had the technology to do so, but seeing people who were still quite uncomfortable, even you seeing into their home. And I remember very clearly one brilliant call with a lady who I was about to do some work with, and her daughter kept trying to show her this painting that she'd done. I mean, it was just lots of splodges, and supposedly it was a Christmas tree or something, but it didn't look like that. And the mother kept on trying to shoo her away to start with. No. And so I started asking the daughter, can you show me what it is? And it sort of took the pressure off the mother in the call to feel like she was trying to do a business call and, you know, get the daughter away. And of course, the daughter then said, oh, hello, you know, who are you? And hi, I'm Ash. And she showed me a picture. That's a great picture. Why don't you go and do another one? And off she went. And then she didn't bother us the rest of the call. And we built trust really quickly because it's just real life. You know, this sort of facade that we're able to put up at work with the business suit and the boardroom, I don't think is always helpful. And I've really enjoyed that in COVID, actually getting to know people much more quickly on both a business and a personal level that would normally be very, very separate. And I hope we continue that, because I think, you know, I love that. I think, you know, whenever I've ever sold any business, it's always because I built trust with somebody, and it doesn't really matter what you're selling. Actually, if they trust you, they'll buy it. And then it's a partnership, right?
I think I'm really sorry, but I have to have a separate say in this. Because I think it's different. Depending on where you are. I mean, I'm not going to contradict what you said, Ash. I mean, building trust and the Zoom with the private home in the background, that's really great. But I can't say that I've really had too many conversations with men from the Central European and South European countries concerning mental well-being. And that is also something that, you know, we're talking about within the European Regional Forum. You know, I think there's still this very big diversity as far as the approach to mental well, you know, to the, you know, the lawyer is still perceived as this, you know, indestructible superhuman, almost macho, you know, in the Eastern and Southern European countries. So actually getting the discussion started on mental well-being issues, but more so among men, is I see that as a very big challenge for the future.
Yes, yeah, I agree. And, you know, you know, the fact that we have an audience from over 20 different jurisdictions today, it's, you know, the solutions I think are going to be different. They're going to be different at a regional level, at a jurisdictional level. And of course, the work that we'll be doing with the ERF is there. But, you know, is there I guess it's, you know, and we keep coming back to vulnerability in the workplace and acceptance, I guess. And part of mental health and talking about mental health is vulnerability, and is that acceptance. And of course, there's a cultural piece to that. There's a leadership piece to that. And it's very different. So I'm actually going to ask a poll now, which that poll is about vulnerability in the workplace. So Emma, would you be able to launch that poll for us now, please? So that poll is, do you view vulnerability in the workplace as a strength or a weakness? Yeah, I'll give a few more seconds on this. Okay, I think we're done on that. So that's interesting. So can everybody see that? 2/3 we've got as a strength and 35% as a weakness. again, I'm going to come back to I'm going to come back to you all. I'm going to come back to you first of all, Jeff.
Yeah.
Are you surprised with that result?
I honestly am. I'm really encouraged by it. And if you were to ask me, like, I like data, so I would want to go, okay, what's the breakdown of, like, especially what Anna said, what's the breakdown of where these people are culturally? What's the gender breakdown along these norms too? Like, I would really love to know that. But this, I'm probably going to use this stat when I speak in other occasions, because that is really heartening to see. Because I do think that people really still equate it as weakness. I know that we're on a journey. I think the truth of it isn't. I'm sure Ash could tell us stories that the definition of courage requires vulnerability. It doesn't exist. Like, you can't be courageous or strong or brave without that. I don't know how you're courageous without being vulnerable, but I'm really happy to see this, to be honest with you. I hope it's next year 80%, but I think this is good.
And bearing in mind, when I look through the list today, we have probably quite a few European countries covered. We have America, we have Canada, we have Africa, we've got Latin America, we've got the Middle East. So that's quite diverged. And to still get, we also within the mix, the ratio of men and women, we were pretty much 50-50 around men and women who signed up.
Great.
For this webinar. Great. And I have to say as well, a lot of the conversations I have around vulnerability are with men, are with male leaders. And I wonder if that is perhaps because it's not expected of them. So it's kind of the fact that they are able to talk publicly about being vulnerable is a bit different. And actually they're really stepping outside of a comfort zone. They're really stepping up their leadership as well. So I think it's fantastic that we're seeing that, and it's a real strength. But Ash, if we come to you and we look at that and sort of your own experience with vulnerability in the work, how does vulnerability fit with getting up one day and perhaps being shot at, or perhaps losing a comrade, but then having to be brave and to be able to continue? How did you do that? How did vulnerability fit into that piece?
Well, just if I may, there's been quite a lot of question or Q&A sort of comments about the poll and vulnerability, and I just pick up on some of those things. That vulnerability potentially means different things to different people, and it can manifest in different ways. And I think the poll, let's not read too much into it, because people may take very different views on what that means or what the question was asking, and it may indicate what people would like to be the case rather than what may be the reality today. For me, vulnerability, if I said I want everybody to be really vulnerable at work, that doesn't mean I want people to sit around crying because they're just showing that they've got emotions and they're struggling. It's for me more about having the self-awareness as a leader, rather than so one could say vulnerability is akin to some sort of self-awareness. To your question about how we coped with or how we treated vulnerability in sort of situations that went bad, as I said at the start, I've been shot, which was clearly shocking. When it happens, it's not only irritating because in my case, because my legs stopped working as I was shot in both legs and hit with a couple of grenades, and we were still being shot at in an ambush with many people firing automatic weapons, and we were trying to extract out of that killing zone, as it's referred to, and I kept on falling flat on my face. So that was annoying because we wanted to get out of there, and I was putting other people at risk because they thought I was running behind them, and I wasn't. I was just lying on the floor. We lost somebody that day, standing a meter or less than a meter on my shoulder, who was shot in the head. We then, I was too wounded to go out the next day, but the team came back. We did a debrief on what had happened, what had gone well, what hadn't gone well, obviously. And then we had to go out the next day because the intelligence took us on the next mission, and the mission was more important than our individual needs. Now, that's not to say that we didn't have moments of reflection, and I felt very emotional at having been a commander of that mission and not brought everybody home safely, and the sort of the concomitant impact on families. And, you know, I didn't know at the time if he had kids. He didn't in the end, but, you know, it didn't really matter. You know, there are obviously a lot of other people affected by it. But we had to think about why we were there and why it was important about what we were doing. So back to your point about common purpose, that really for us, in every difficult situation I've been in over the, you know, many decades in uniform where there was risk to life, it was about the mission and the common purpose that was so clear for us about why we were doing what we're doing that got us through, honestly. And an organization's common purpose can't just be a slogan that's on a poster or a mouse mat. It's got to be something that you can live and breathe and understand, like a strategy, really. Not, you know, brilliantly written strategy is no use if it sits in a folder on the shelf and you know, that's it. It's got to be something that is implementable at every level, and it requires teams at every level and leaders at every level to take that high level mission and purpose and translate it into something relevant to them. So when they come to work every day, they know that they are doing something that is furthering the overarching organization's core purpose. When I was a management consultant, you know, working with a company called the Crystal Group, it was referred to as team of teams. The methodology is team of teams. So no one team's needs or actions or behaviors are more important than the overarching team. And everything we did was geared to helping, supporting, and delivering stuff as a collective, you know, for the overarching aim. And therefore, just finally on the sort of the common purpose bit or the purpose piece, the art for a commander or a leader is to unlock the passion of your employees to want to come to work and be passionate about what they're doing every day. That's, you know, when you've got the right purpose that makes sense is when people get up every day and go, I'm coming to work because I want to be part of this. This is what we're aiming for, to be the best, you know, M&A team in the world or in our region, and, you know, whatever. In complex environments that I've already sort of alluded to are inherently unpredictable. You can't give people certainty, which humans love. They love to know what's going to happen, but that doesn't exist now, right? But you can give them clarity. So providing clarity of purpose, and that's enough, you know, passion and clarity. With the vulnerability piece, I think it can have negative connotations for people. It, you know, as I said, it could mean, you know, going to work and just sitting in the corner crying. That's not it at all. So I think how we frame that behavior is key. You know, is it about wellness? So rather than necessarily talk about mental health, which again can have negative connotations, a lot of this is about wellness. And there's many things every organization, every leader and individuals can do for themselves that will help maintain and improve wellness. And it's a lot easier to maintain wellness than treat illness, right? So, you know, rather than waiting for your people to break and then go, right, we've really got to do something about mental health. Actually, let's think about what people need to maintain this healthy, well sort of lifestyle while delivering at work. More than thinking about it, mental health as an issue that is a negative thing to then sort of tackle.
Yeah, and I think, Ash, there's sort of, you've covered off quite a few of the questions that have been asked around vulnerability. Interesting, all the questions that are coming through around vulnerability. One we have is around the difference between vulnerability in peers versus vulnerability in leadership. And I think that's a very good time for us to start talking about leadership and what kind of leadership do we want. And I know that Jeff often talks about the concept of the imperfect leader, who vulnerability as a strength. And I think it's also really important for us to talk about how we look after the leaders as well. We've touched on that, but actually for the leaders to be able to look after their teams. And Jeff, you and I remember having a conversation, and it was so good. It was summer, but of course it's the UK and it was freezing cold. And I was sat outside on my mobile phone shivering because I didn't have a coat on, except the conversation was so interesting that I just sat there for half an hour and froze. But it was really about that. It was, you know, how do we get to that point where the leaders can be vulnerable, but that also there's a support network for the leaders, and the leaders don't feel like they're going to fall over, and actually they have to be invincible. And, you know, the issue in the legal profession about perfectionism and being invincible, that actually they can't fail. And unfortunately that's the makeup of lawyers. It's often what makes them very good lawyers, but actually I think we're moving into something different. So Jeff, talk to us about that, about the kind of leadership that we want.
Sure, maybe I'll touch on leadership and demonstrated leading, role modeling, vulnerability, and then a bit about perfectionism and legal. Like, so leaders are role modeling behavior, whether they like it or not, right? You're leading. So if you want teams to be resilient and take care of themselves, learn to do that, you need to show them that you take the time as a leader to take care of yourself. Otherwise, like if you're going to be the idea of the leader who will cross their own personal boundaries and do anything for their team, is teaching their members, their team members, to not have boundaries and undermine their own self-worth in the process. If you try to be boundaryless and sacrificial of anything you'll do, if you teach that in your team, you're going to really destroy a team quickly. And I don't think anybody wants to have a team that has low self-worth, low confidence, and set them up to replicate that destructive example for others. I remember this one lawyer, an external lawyer that we hired, and he said he loved to work so much, and he loved to work when he went on vacation. He was going to California, and he really loved to work, and please call him while he's away. Don't think not to. He really loves working. And I didn't hire that person again. And despite how smart he was, and despite how willing sacrifices he was willing to make to provide work for us, I didn't want my team to see or kind of understand or encourage that behavior. And I think what's underlying that is some of this, fear of losing work or fear of failure. And this is a problem in the world. This is a problem in our profession in particular. And I have suffered from this when I started as a lawyer at an M&A law firm in Canada. I think the important thing to understand is that, when we say things that, you answer the interview and say, what's your greatest weakness? And go, oh, I'm a perfectionist. I've spent so long perfecting everything. I think that we need a better understanding of what that means, because they've done studies on perfectionism. You can measure it. They've broken it out into 3 different categories. One's called self-oriented perfectionism. That's the one where we say, I'm not smart enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not fit enough, I'm not paid enough, I'm not whatever. There's other-oriented perfectionism, where you're holding other people out to unreasonable standards of perfection. And there's socially oriented perfectionism. This happens in law firms, this happens in businesses, where we hold the culture actually rejects the notion of imperfection and failure. But there's a problem. We're human and we are imperfect, and there's no question about that. And the perfectionist mindset, here's some fun facts about it. It comes along, it's directly correlated to mental health disorders such as anxiety, eating disorders, suicide ideation, substance abuse disorders. Like, it leads to these types of things. So when we create those cultures, it's not surprising that substance abuse issues spikes within the legal profession. And is the myth of trying to be perfect when we know we aren't worth all of that suffering? And for leaders, if you're a perfectionist leader, which I'm sure we all have been at some points in our careers, you are literally forcing that mindset on the people you're leading. They have really no choice. It's almost like oppressive in a sense. And so I think here's the key as a leader. Let go of the idea of failure being terrifying. Because failure is not the scary thing. Fear of being judged is foolish, is actually what the problem is. I think that's what we're scared of. But if you accept that you're worthy of all your success and all your achievements, and that you're this awesome, that you're Anna, and you are amazing at what you do, and you're incredible at what you do, despite your flaw, and you make mistakes, but you're still amazing at what you do. Once you accept that, I think you can say goodbye to this perfectionist mindset. I can say goodbye to this feeling of being an imposter, and someone's going to find out that you're actually not perfect. I think that you develop a true sense of connection with other people. And I honestly think the other thing I'd say about it, it's just so much more fun. It's so much more easy to work in a way to let yourself off this imaginary standard of perfection that we know in our hearts that is impossible, which is why we feel like frauds when we're pretending to be that. Does that help?
That's really helpful. Thank you, Jeff. That was fantastic. And in fact, that brings us then to our last poll, which is around leadership. So Emma, could you launch our poll, please? Okay, our poll, if everyone can see that, is vulnerability encouraged by the leadership within your firm?
I'm scared about the answer to this question.
Yeah, I know. This is an interesting one. So a couple more seconds.
It touches on the point in the chat that is vulnerability a strength, and people are saying yes, but I think there was whether or not it's practiced is a different question.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing to say about this one is this has had the smallest number of people. Only about half of the attendees have filled this in. And as I said, I promised everyone, and it's truth, that everything is confidential. We can't see who's answering any of these things. But I do wonder if people haven't felt comfortable about answering this. Is vulnerability encouraged by the leadership within your firm? No, almost 60%, 59%. I have my own thoughts on that, but I'm going to come out to the audience. I'm going to ask you, Ash, first of all, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's an issue. I'll just follow up really on some of Jeff's stuff about being a perfectionist leader. I think if we accept that we're going to have to come up with innovative solutions to new problems, to novel problems, then you can't be a perfectionist because the solution doesn't necessarily yet exist. So if you want to run an organization that is genuinely adaptable and you want to empower your teams to think innovatively about solutions to make you more competitive or increase market share or win more business, you have to accept by definition, if you're trying new things, it won't always work. Look at the pharmaceutical industry or life sciences. 90% of everything they do when they come to work fails. Yeah. Yet you still have incredibly passionate people that go in day out because they know that they are trying their purpose. I'm trying to cure cancer. I'm trying to come up with a vaccine for COVID. Their leadership doesn't go, I want you, I'm going to give you $1 million. You better make sure that $1 million is spent perfectly and we have a solution at the end of it. That's just not how these things work. So I think, again, it all comes down to the leadership's mindset and behavior and how that's modeled and how it comes across the team. Now, going back to my experience in the Middle East in the early 2000s, where we were fighting Al-Qaeda, they were a very differently organized entity than anything we'd experienced before. Every terrorist organization we'd fought up to that point was generally hierarchical. If you took out, you detained, arrested leaders at different levels, you could, generally work out that there'd be a pause because they'd have to recruit someone new, and then his boss or her, there was this hierarchy and a structure that was understandable to us because that's how we were constructed as defense, as most big organizations. We, to our detriment, we thought, well, I certainly am guilty of this as well. I pictured in my mind a hierarchical structure when I was going on missions to arrest, terrorist X or Y. When we were successful, I go, right, well, he's out of it. Therefore, we just need to now to get the next person in the chain, blah, blah, blah. And we go on the next mission and find, yeah, you got the right house, but he left 2 hours ago or 2 days ago. And we go, we're almost there. We're just too slow. And what most organizations I see in business do as well, when that happens, you just go, right, we just need to work harder. So people work more hours and they work the same way of working, but just faster and harder and faster and harder. It then crushes people, in terms of their work-life balance, etc. And they just can't cope because it's too much stress. And you still don't actually get any closer because it's a dynamic network threat that we were facing that was constantly evolving. So the more we interacted with it, every mission we just did a bit faster, we were driving the change that was making it harder for us to be successful. And one way so we didn't have the luxury of communicating from leadership from the top to the bottom in a hierarchical linear way. We had to find a way to align our organization at a cadence that was related to the rate of change in that external environment, and have as many people on that call that could be aligned in one go. Because again, we didn't have the luxury of Melissa tells Ash, Ash then goes away and tells Jeff, Jeff then tells Anna. It was just too slow. By the time Anna got the message, it would have been out of date. So we ended up having a call that started with 50 people mandated to be there. It ended up being 7,500 people a day dialed into this call. And we heard from the boss every day, right at the top, strategically, I've just come off the phone to the president. He's really worried about this. This is keeping me up at night, blah, blah, blah. And then it would filter down, and we'd give our sort of mission activity that had happened in the previous 24 hours. It was no good saying what we'd done well, because that wasn't helpful. It became culturally, the only thing that was going to be valuable was telling people what hadn't gone well or where you needed support, so that the collective of 25,000 brains that was the entire organization could then help solve the problems. And that was the way in which we were able to go from 4 raids a week to 10 raids a night, or sorry, 4 raids a month to 10 raids a night. No increase in people. It was just a different mindset, the way we shared, communicated and stuff. And this, to the video conferencing thing about invulnerability, the boss would always have his video on, whether he was looking terrible, tired, disheveled, covered in dirt, whatever, the video was on. Even though he never saw most people in the organization, the fact they could see him, and even though he was a brilliant general, when he looked tired or said, I don't know, everybody could see that. And that was the vulnerability he showed. And actually, he had quite a clever technique, and there may be some leaders on the call who want to try this, to set the culture up early in the right way when this call started, because he recognized if he got it wrong, people wouldn't share. They wouldn't say, I messed up on this mission, because the fear of being judged, to Jeff's point, would be so great. So he would pre-plant mistakes sort of in the briefing. For example, I would do a briefing and he'd get in touch in advance and say, when you do your briefing, I'm going to get something wrong. You have to correct me. So I would do my briefing and he'd go, so Ash, you said that, 10 enemy did No, General, it was 20 and this is why. Oh, yeah, my mistake. And there was, 7,500 person intake of breath where they thought I was going to get my head ripped off. But his response saying, my mistake, was huge. And, as I said, it was placed initially, but genuinely there were times where he was tired and everything else. And although a brilliant general that was inspirational and we trusted, he was ultimately human. And that's the vulnerability, I think, that it's important to show, is not that you're invincible and, this impenetrable barrier. It's not to see you crying on screen, but just to be human and show some empathy. And that's where you will connect across the entire organization, no matter how big it is, no matter where it is.
Yeah. And I'm just saying, we've actually got quite a lot of questions and points coming through. And I've seen one here, learning from pandemic as a leader is that staff members will remember how you made them feel long after the virus has passed. Do you agree that the upside of showing vulnerability is that you give others a place that is safe and secure to be honest in all that they say? I mean, personally, and coming from my own point of view, as a leader, I am vulnerable. I'm very happy to be vulnerable. Good example of that was about 3 weeks ago, a little bit longer. It was the first anniversary of me losing my mum, which was last year, and the few weeks leading up to that were horrific, absolutely horrific. Probably one of the worst feelings I've had, perhaps even worse than I felt last year. I didn't expect it. I didn't know how to deal with it. And what I realized was that grief is not a comfortable emotion that generally anybody talks about, but particularly not in the workplace. And I put up a post on LinkedIn saying how I was struggling with that. And actually that, I basically wanted to start a conversation. And I got so many comments from all over the world. And I got a lot of messages as well. And a lot of people saying, my mom died last year. My dad died last year. My mom is dying. My dad is dying. Thank you for allowing me to think that I can think about this and talk about this in the workplace. About a week later, I was talking to a client and the client said to me, hey, how are you doing, Melissa? I think, yeah, great. No, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm good. No, really. How are you doing? And on that third one, I said, do you know what? Actually, struggling a bit at the moment. And we talked about it. And actually, it turned out she'd had a loss as well. And we ended up talking for almost an hour about loss. We didn't talk about work. We didn't talk about the project. We didn't put any ROI on that at all. We basically built a relationship among both of us, being vulnerable and her asking me a question, me answering it positively. And I think that's a huge thing. And I think, the fact that we had 60% there saying that they don't think vulnerability is encouraged from leadership, I think that's perhaps where we have to move the dial first of all, so that everybody else can feel okay. And all of the questions coming through, I think were quite similar to that. But Anna, I wondered if you had anything to say about that. And of course, you're from Poland. You're within Europe, and we've already talked about the fact, and within the fact that you and I are on the IBA committee, and we've already seen that it's different in different cultures already. So that leadership piece of how to encourage leaders perhaps to be vulnerable. Do you have any advice on that?
Well, I have a comment that it's extremely difficult in practice to balance the notion of vulnerability and of wanting to keep your team sort of aware that you are vulnerable and they can be vulnerable, when the workload is so huge and is so crushing that all of you are staying at the office during the nights and during the weekends, and there's basically no possibility of discussing even work-life balance. So it is very, very difficult, especially for professions such as ours, to to find a solution to this problem. I have to say, Jeff, I had a comment when you were talking about the imperfect leader. I kept seeing all these policies that law firms have, that when you go on vacation, you're not allowed to put on your out of office message because a client can never know that you are on vacation. So yeah,
I honestly, here's what I would say to you, and I really mean this. I'm not saying this because it's a talk. I'm saying this honestly. That I've had a firm in a similar situation. We do deals all over the world. They're time pressured. I've had partners who called me and said, "We need more time. Like this is not working." And I know that's the sin. Don't tell the client that. All that does is put me in a position of trying to figure out a way that I can lighten that up. And that's like, that makes me feel really good. And on top of it, it makes me feel that person is being really direct and open and honest with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that person we use a lot, actually, on other deals as a result of that kind of openness. If your clients, if I knew, like, I'm not going to say this, but the firm, but it's heartbreaking to me that a firm would have that kind of approach that say, don't put your out of office on because clients won't see you on vacation. I think that I would not promote that widely because, that suggests a culture that could lead to really not great work at the end of the day. People being burnt out and overwhelmed, and I'd really encourage promoting with your clients how you do promote well-being in your offices. That's what I want to buy. I want to buy that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And also what you said, Melissa, the difference in approach to mental well-being between even European countries, because as the ERF, as the European Regional Forum, we did a questionnaire on this within of course, within Europe. And it was amazing. I mean, never did we see an answer that said that the approach was satisfactory. that has to be said. But, there was some level of discussion. There were some programs that were meant to aid mental well-being issues. But, in some jurisdictions, we even, we had such phrases as taboo, mental well-being, 21st century, taboo, stigma, or this is not a problem yet, so we do see that there is a huge amount of work to be done. And actually that is what our aim is to do within the European Regional Forum, because we have, boots on ground in basically every jurisdiction. We think that we are the ones who can at least start the conversation going, reach out to legal, associations, to universities, law schools, to bars, not bars, bar associations.
Yeah.
And but maybe bars is not such a bad idea. And basically just start the conversation going. It's not going to be the same conversation in every jurisdiction, but that's the challenge, to identify how to approach the subject, just so that the conversation is started. Yeah,
I think it's a really good point. And I think that, and again, I keep saying it, I think in the last 12 months, we have moved forward on being able to discuss mental health, mental wellness, and the difference between mental wellness and mental health. Mental wellness might not be great because you've been working on a really long case for 20 hours a day for the last 2 weeks, but mental health might be because actually for the last 6 months you felt different and you haven't been able to get out of bed. So I think that understanding between mental health and mental wellness, and again being able to talk about it, and just the fact that today, and I'm aware we've got 4 minutes left, today we've had a couple of hundred people effectively from over 20 different jurisdictions all wanting to talk about the same topic, and that mix of leaders with others in firms. I think it means that people are wanting to talk about this. They're wanting to hear. And, the fact that we had 60% saying they didn't feel like the leadership would encourage vulnerability, shifting that dial, I think is really important. But if I can use just the last sort of few minutes, I guess, to talk about, is there one tip that each of you would give to perhaps to individuals and or to leaders about that life balance, perhaps boundaries, and how to promote positive mental health? So Ash, if I could come to you first.
I think probably just as a leader, thinking about how you can be kind and empathetic, being somebody who listens to the individual needs of your people is something that perhaps we've not always been good at in the past. And that, the statistics are well borne out that most people leave their bosses than their jobs. So being a boss who at least understands individual requirements is key. And therefore, particularly when people are juggling, kids schooling and all these other things that have happened during COVID, just not behaving in a way that might have been acceptable 12 months ago. We're all adults at the end of the day, particularly in your legal profession, you're often dealing with very, very serious things, and you should be treated therefore, as mature adults who know what needs to be done and to make decisions for yourself. I think the more we organizationally or as leaders take away decisions from our people, the less we get out of them, the more they will just do what they're told rather than what might be the right thing to do. And I've been very lucky to work for a couple of firms in the last few years who have, for example, an unlimited leave policy, and they trust you to take leave when you need it or want it. And personally, I really value that. So I know that I can go away, and when I do, it's because I want to. But when I'm at work, I work really hard. And actually, again, ironically, statistically, for the younger generation, you have to be careful of this. When given unlimited leave, most people take less than if they were told you have to take 26 days or 21 days or 29 days. So I think overarchingly, thinking about being kind and empathetic and listening, then you will maintain the loyalty and trust of your people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ash. And Jeff?
One tip, maybe this is a little more controversial, but I think a lot of people who are attended here are from law firms, and often those places have benefit plans, health benefit plans, or ways to access help. And I think if you believe what the medical advisors are telling us all, that we are experiencing a different wave of mental health challenges right now across the globe. I'd encourage people to become more self-aware by reaching out and actually seeking counseling. I say, I know some people feel that's taboo, and why would I do that? I don't know how to do it. I'd say try it. Just try it and think about it the same way you think about going to a gym and getting a trainer and teaching you how to lift weights and whatever. Try it, and maybe try it not for once, but try it for 6 weeks, and maybe you'll find and dig into yourself a little bit. I'm going to think that you're going to come out stronger, more courageous, and more aware. That would be my one tip.
I completely wholeheartedly agree with you, Jeff. And Anna, you've got the last minute, Anna.
30 seconds. Well, since I've already said that there's absolutely no discussion about, life-work balance within the legal, at least in law firms, I think we as leaders need to show our teams that, it's not only work. When you come to work, there's also time for camaraderie, for support, for fun, and you need to weave that into the workday as much as possible, because then you get satisfied and grateful people who are willing to to put in the extra hours with you.
Thank you, and we're dead on time. Well done, everybody. Thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I think I have to say, and I don't say this every time, I promise, this has probably been the most interesting and exhilarating webinar that I've hosted in the last 12 months. And I think it was timely. I hope that everybody, we've had some really nice positive comments in the chat as well. And let's just keep this conversation going. So thank you to the three of you. Thank you all so much for being so open, so vulnerable, and providing such an interesting debate. So thank you, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.